A detective senses he's being watched from his office window and sees a strange, motionless figure across the street in an abandoned boarding house. When the figure vanishes, he goes to investigate. It began on a night too still for comfort. One of those nights when the air feels thick and the silence hums just loud enough to make you wonder if it's silence at all. I was sitting in my office, the only light coming from the lamp on my desk and the orange glow of a dying cigarette. The case files were stacked high, but my mind wasn't on them. I had that feeling again, the kind that creeps up your spine and whispers that you're not alone. At first, I thought it was the bourbon. Then I thought it was nerves. But when I looked out the window, I saw it. Across the street, in the window of the old boarding house, a shape stood motionless. Too still to be casual. Too dark to be human. Just a silhouette. Thin, long, wrong somehow. The curtain barely moved around it, though there was no wind. I stared for a long minute. The shape didn't move, didn't flinch. It was as if it had been waiting for me to notice. Then, without a sound, the light behind it went out. My cigarette fell from my fingers. I didn't move for a long time after that. Something told me, something deep in my gut, that this wasn't just someone curious about the detective across the street. No, this was different. This was personal. And that was the moment I decided to find out who, or what, had been watching me. The city was asleep when I left the office. A fog had rolled in from the river, thick and pale like breath on a mirror. The streets glistened with the last of the rain, and each step echoed too loudly against the cobblestones. I crossed to the boarding house, the one with the darkened window. From the street, it looked abandoned, boards warped with damp, paint peeling like scabbed skin. But a faint light flickered somewhere deep inside, like a candle struggling for life. The front door was unlocked. That should have been my first warning. It opened with a long, tired groan, the kind that sounded too human to be wood. The air inside smelled of dust, mold, and something else, something metallic, faint but sharp. Blood, maybe. Or rust. The hallway stretched ahead of me, swallowed by shadows. I took out my flashlight and flicked it on. The beam caught torn wallpaper, shoe prints in the dust, and a staircase curling upward into darkness. Then came the sound. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Just above me. I froze. My pulse started to drum in my ears. Whoever it was, they were pacing, back and forth, across the floor directly overhead. And then they stopped. I waited, listening. The silence pressed in. When I took a step forward, the footsteps resumed, but now they were on the stairs, coming down toward me. Each creak sounded deliberate, measured. I lifted the flashlight toward the staircase. The beam trembled slightly in my hand. Something moved between the banisters, something that didn't look quite right. And then, just as the shape reached the bottom step, the light went out. For a heartbeat, there was nothing, just the kind of darkness that feels alive, thick and watching. I clicked the flashlight again. Nothing. Dead batteries. Convenient timing. I stood still, listening. The footsteps had stopped. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It had weight, a low, steady pulse beneath it, like breathing that didn't belong to me. Then came the whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind finding its way through cracks in the old wood. But no, there were words. Quiet, drawn-out syllables spilling from beneath the floorboards. Not English. Not anything I recognized. I knelt down slowly, pressing my ear to the warped boards. The voice was clearer now, soft, urgent, like someone whispering through cloth. I caught fragments, twisted echoes of sound that crawled under my skin. Then, just as I leaned closer, something knocked from below. 3 times. Slow. Heavy. I stumbled back, my heart clawing at my ribs. The knocking came again, closer this time, almost directly beneath my boots. And then the boards began to bulge, as though something was pushing up from underneath, straining against the wood. That's when I saw it. A thin, pale finger forcing its way through the crack between the planks. Not a hand, just one finger. Long, too long. It twitched once. Then again. I ran, burst out into the street, gasping, the night air cutting cold into my lungs. I didn't stop running until I reached my office. But when I slammed the door behind me and turned on the lights, the floor was already wet. And there were muddy footprints, small ones, leading from the window to my desk. The footprints stopped at my desk. I stared at them, the way you might stare at an unfamiliar handwriting, trying to decide if it's human at all. Small, bare, the toes splayed like they didn't know how to walk right. The water around them smelled faintly of the river. My desk drawer was open. I never leave it open. Inside, the files were undisturbed, but something new sat on top of them. A photograph, old and curling at the edges. It was a picture of me. I was standing at my window, the one in my office. The blinds half drawn. The same night, the same suit. The same cigarette burning between my fingers. Only, in the reflection of the glass, behind me, there was a shape. Tall, thin, featureless. Watching. My throat tightened. I flipped the photo over. On the back, scrawled in trembling ink, were 3 words. Don't look away. The phone rang then. An old rotary that never sounded pleasant even in daylight. The sharp click of the dial startled me so hard I nearly dropped the photo. I picked up. Static. Then breathing. Then a whisper I'd already heard once before. That same language. Those same drawn-out syllables from under the floorboards. Only this time, I could tell exactly where the voice was coming from. Not through the line. From inside the office. Behind me. I turned slowly, the receiver still pressed to my ear. The lights flickered, and for the briefest instant, I saw the shadow again, standing by the window, hand pressed to the glass like it wanted to come through. The lights went out. The whisper stopped. And in that hush, I heard the soft, deliberate sound of breathing right next to me that I didn't dare move. The air around me felt thick, electric, as though the room itself was holding its breath. That slow, rasping inhalation came again from my left, brushing my ear like something alive. I turned, too fast, and the lamp on my desk toppled, shattering on the floor. The light flickered once, then died completely, leaving only the faint silver wash of the streetlight sneaking through the blinds. For a moment, I thought I saw a face in that half-light, pale, pressed against the window pane from the inside. My reflection, maybe, or something pretending to be. I stumbled toward the bathroom at the far end of the office, searching for the backup flashlight. My hand found the switch by instinct, but the bulb inside didn't turn on. Just a pop, and then the smell of burnt filament. That's when I saw it. In the cracked mirror above the sink, I wasn't alone. There was a man standing behind me. No, beside me, but when I turned, no one was there. Only the reflection showed him. He was tall, his head tilted too far to one side, as if the bones of his neck had softened. His skin was gray, and his eyes were just hollow spaces where light went to die. He leaned closer in the glass, and though he didn't speak, I heard his voice inside me. You shouldn't have looked back. I stumbled backward, my shoulder hitting the doorframe. The reflection smiled then, slow, stretching too wide, as cracks spread across the mirror like frost. And from those cracks, something began to seep out. Not light, not shadow, something wet. Dark streaks slid down the glass, dripping onto the sink, carrying the faint metallic scent I'd smelled before, blood or rust. I couldn't tell. The last thing I saw before I fled the room was my own reflection, still standing there after I'd stepped away. It was still smiling. Sleep wasn't an option that night. I sat in my office chair, staring at the clock on the wall. The minute hand ticked like a heartbeat in an empty chest. Every sound was too loud. The hum of the radiator, the faint tap of rain against the window. I tried convincing myself it was stress, a hallucination, a trick of exhaustion. But the broken mirror in the bathroom said otherwise. The floor was still wet beneath it, the smell of rust still heavy in the air. When the clock hit 3:07 a.m., the tapping on the window began. 3 knocks. Slow. Even. I froze. The sound came again. 3 more, a little harder this time. I turned my head, careful not to stand. The blinds were drawn halfway, and through the thin slats I saw movement, something tall shifting on the other side of the glass. Another knock, softer now, almost polite. I reached for my revolver. My hand was shaking so badly I could hardly open the drawer. When I finally did, I found another photograph waiting inside. Not of me this time. Of my office window. In the picture, something was pressing its face against the glass. Only there was no reflection, no detail, just an outline, featureless, like a hole cut into the world, and scrawled across the bottom, in the same trembling ink as before. Let me in. The knocking stopped. Then came a new sound, slow, scraping, like fingernails dragging across the window pane. And then, the whisper again. Closer this time. It wasn't coming from the window anymore. It was inside the room. The air turned colder, the kind of cold that feels alive, crawling over your skin like frostbite. My breath fogged in front of me, and when I exhaled, there was another plume beside it, someone else's breath. I turned, revolver raised. There was nothing there. But on the window behind me, in the condensation left by our breaths, words appeared, letters forming slowly, one after another. You already did. When dawn came, it didn't bring light, only a dull gray that made everything look waterlogged and half-real. My office reeked of metal and damp. The words on the window had faded, but the glass still carried faint outlines where the letters had been, as though something had burned them into the condensation. I told myself I needed proof, something tangible, something I could listen to later and convince myself I hadn't lost my mind. So I set up the old tape recorder on my desk, the one I used to capture interviews, confessions, the lies of men who thought they could hide from truth. I pressed record. The reel spun, whispering its quiet mechanical hiss. For hours, nothing happened. Just my breathing, the ticking clock, the occasional groan of the building settling. Until 3:07 p.m. The tape whirred faster. The sound of static thickened, like wind howling through wires. Then came a click, and a low, wet breathing filled the speakers. Not mine. I froze. My own voice crackled through the recording, faint, confused, muttering things I never said. Why did you let it in? I didn't. You did. You looked back. My stomach turned to ice. I rewound the tape, but this time, there was something else underneath the voices, barely audible, buried in the static. I turned the volume up. It wasn't words at first, just a long, moaning sound, rising and falling like someone trapped deep underwater. Then, slowly, syllables began to take shape. A whisper I'd heard before, slithering through the machine's mechanical hum. But the last few words were English. Clear. Familiar. I'm still in the mirror. The power went out before I could stop the tape. In the sudden dark, the recorder kept spinning. No electricity, no sound, just the reels turning on their own. And from the direction of the bathroom, I heard a faint tapping, like fingernails, on glass. When the lights flickered back to life, I was already halfway to the door. But I stopped. Something in me, curiosity, madness, whatever was left, pulled me back toward the bathroom. The tapping had stopped. Only the faint drip of water echoed inside. I stood at the doorway, staring into the cracked mirror. The fissures had deepened overnight, spreading like veins across the surface. But there was something new this time, something that made the air tighten in my throat. A handprint, pressed flat against the glass from inside. It was small, pale, and smeared with streaks of something dark that had begun to run down the wall beneath the mirror. Rust, I thought. Blood, I knew. I raised my own hand toward it. Not to touch, just to see if it would move. It did. As my fingers hovered inches from the surface, the reflection's hand shifted slightly, pressing harder against the glass. The sound it made was soft, like skin dragging against wet ice. I stumbled back, but the reflection didn't retreat. It stayed there, its palm flat, its fingers twitching in small, jerky movements. Then it began to slide downward, slowly, leaving 5 long streaks behind. I should have run, but something about that motion, so deliberate, so purposeful, held me still. I found myself whispering, almost without realizing it. What do you want? The answer came as condensation bloomed across the mirror's surface, letters forming as though breathed from the other side. To remember. The glass began to fog more, the words growing clearer, desperate now. You promised. My heart hammered. Promised what? To who? And then, as I stared, my reflection smiled, slow, unfamiliar, nothing like the one I'd seen in the mirror my entire life. Its lips moved, but no sound came. Then, faintly, behind me, a whisper finished the sentence my reflection's mouth had formed. You said you'd bring me back. I didn't leave the office that night. Somehow I couldn't. It felt like the city outside had turned away from me, its hum gone, its windows blind. The only sound was the quiet mechanical whir of the tape recorder still spinning, though I'd unplugged it hours ago. I sat there, trying to steady my hands, flipping through the case files scattered across my desk, maybe to distract myself, maybe to find a thread that made sense. That's when I found her. A photograph I didn't remember taking. It was tucked inside a folder from an old missing persons case I'd closed months ago. A young woman, dark hair, eyes like dusk, familiar in a way I couldn't place. The edges of the photo were damp, warped, as though it had been submerged in water. But there, In the background, half lost in the blur, stood me. My reflection in a shop window behind her, looking straight at the camera. A chill slid through me. I flipped the picture over. On the back, the same handwriting. You found her once. I remembered the case now, or pieces of it. A woman found floating near the river docks. No ID, no family, her skin gray from the current. They said she drowned herself, but I never filed the final report. Something about it hadn't felt right. The phone rang again. I didn't answer, but the voice on the machine made me stop breathing. It was her voice. The woman from the photograph. Soft, pleading, warped by static. You left me there. Then a long pause. I could hear water dripping in the background. I watched you through the glass. You looked back. That's how I got in. The recording ended with a sound like bubbles rising through mud. I looked toward the window. Outside, the street was empty, except for a figure standing ankle-deep in the puddle below the lamplight. A woman, hair plastered to her face, head tilted upward, staring directly at me. As I watched, her mouth moved, but no sound came. Then, softly, the window fogged from the outside, and across the mist she wrote one word with her finger. Remember. The word on the glass lingered, trembling in the cold. Remember. Then the fog faded, and she was gone. No footsteps. No splash. Just the hollow quiet of a city that didn't care what it had just swallowed. I sat there until the sun began to crawl across the rooftops, a pale imitation of light that couldn't quite reach the corners of my office. I thought maybe I'd imagined her. Maybe the mind, once cracked, fills its own shadows. Then I heard it. A slow, rhythmic sound, faint but steady, drip, drip, drip. It wasn't rain. It was coming from beneath the floorboards. I knelt, pressing my ear to the wood. What I heard wasn't water exactly. It was movement, a soft, endless current, whispering through unseen channels below my feet. I fetched a screwdriver and pried up one of the boards. Beneath it was darkness, and a smell that made my stomach turn, damp, rotting mineral. I shone my flashlight inside. What I saw shouldn't have been there. A thin stream of black water running silently through the crawl space, like a fragment of river buried beneath the building. It moved with its own pulse, its own rhythm, as if something alive was flowing through it. And in that water, something gleamed. A locket. Gold, dull with age. I reached for it. My fingers barely touched the surface before the current seemed to rise, curling upward like a living hand, grasping my wrist. The cold was instant, deep, and wrong. I yanked back hard, splashing filth across the floor. The locket came with me, heavy and dripping. Inside, beneath the cracked glass, was a photograph of her, the drowned woman. But her eyes had been scratched out, and where they should have been, words had been carved into the metal with something sharp. She remembers you. The office door creaked open behind me then, though I hadn't touched it. And from the hallway, I heard the unmistakable sound of bare feet slapping against wet wood. The sound of wet footsteps drew closer, slow, uncertain, as though whatever was walking wasn't used to walking anymore. Each slap against the boards echoed inside my skull, followed by the faint creak of weight-shifting breathing. I raised my flashlight toward the hallway. The beam caught nothing but dust drifting in the air. Still, the steps continued. Left, right, closer. When I finally stepped into the hall, the light flickered, and for a second, I thought I saw her. The woman from the river, standing at the far end, hair dripping, head bowed. But when I took a step forward, she was gone. Only the wall remained. But the wall wasn't supposed to be there. The hallway ended abruptly now, where I knew, a doorway should have been. I'd walked through it 100 times to reach the archive room. But instead of an opening, there was smooth plaster, fresh, pale, and damp, like it had been built overnight. Except there was something beneath the plaster. A faint, rhythmic vibration, almost a heartbeat. I pressed my palm against it. The wall was cold, but pulsing, as though it were breathing through the paint. My flashlight dimmed again, and when I looked down, the beam caught something on the floor, muddy footprints. Bare, small, leading straight into the wall. My pulse hammered. I followed the prints with my eyes. They stopped halfway up the plaster, fading into nothing. And then the wall moved. Not much, just a small shudder outward, like a breath. I stumbled back, the locket in my pocket suddenly burning hot against my leg. I pulled it out. Its clasp had come undone, though I hadn't touched it. Inside, the photograph had changed. The woman wasn't alone anymore. I was standing beside her, hand on her shoulder. Both of us staring into the river. The building groaned then, deep, low, and alive. The plaster cracked from ceiling to floor, and through the fissure, I saw what lay beyond. A staircase, spiral, leading downward. The air that came through was cold and smelled of river water and iron. And somewhere below, someone was whispering my name. The crack in the wall widened with a sound like a sigh, soft, tired, but heavy enough to make the light fixtures tremble. I hesitated, the beam of my flashlight shaking in my hand, then stepped through. The staircase beyond spiraled downward into a throat of stone. The walls were slick, sweating with moisture. The smell of the river was stronger here, mixed with rust, rot, and something that reminded me of old coins and graves. Each step groaned under my weight. The deeper I went, the fainter the city became, its traffic, its heartbeat, its life. All of it fading until the only sound left was the quiet lapping of water somewhere below. After what felt like hours, I reached the bottom. The steps opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. The floor was covered by a shallow sheet of black water that rippled without wind. At the center of it all stood a door. It was wrong, tall, narrow, made of warped wood that pulsed slightly with each ripple, as if the water itself was breathing through it. The doorknob was missing, but the locket in my pocket began to hum, a faint vibration that matched the rhythm of the whisper I'd been hearing for days. And then, faintly, I saw her reflection in the water. The woman, standing behind me, watching. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just stared at her reflection, the way her head tilted, her wet hair drifting over her face. She was whispering something, but the words were muffled by the surface of the water. Slowly, she raised her arm and pointed toward the door. The locket grew hotter. The hum became a pulse. My fingers moved before I could think, opening it once more. Inside, the photograph was gone. In its place, a small piece of paper, soaked through but still legible. "You buried me here." The whisper behind me turned into a moan, a low, gurgling sound that seemed to rise through the walls, through the water, through me. And from beneath the door, black liquid began to seep out. Thick, slow, and full of movement. The reflection smiled. And somewhere above, far above, I heard the boards of my office floor splinter. As if something was climbing up, the black water spread across the chamber, rippling in silent rhythm, reaching for my boots. I backed away, but it followed, pulling itself forward in sluggish waves. Within it, I saw movement. Faces, faint and incomplete, rising and falling beneath the surface like forgotten memories trying to breathe. They weren't hers. Not just hers. Men, women, children, all with mouths open wide in the same silent scream. Their eyes were white, their features blurred by the current, yet I knew them. Clients, witnesses, the dead-eyed failed to find, the living-eyed failed to save. They stared upward at me with that one shared expression, recognition. The whisper filled the chamber again. Not one voice now, but many, layered like the echo of waves in a tunnel. "You brought us here." I clutched the locket until the metal bit into my skin. I didn't mean to. The water answered with laughter, wet, shallow, and cruel. Intentions don't bury bodies. The faces began to drift closer, merging into one another until the surface of the water became a single, pale mask with hundreds of eyes. Each eye blinked at a different rhythm, and every blink sounded like a drop falling into a well. Then, beneath that endless face, I saw her. The woman from the river. She was standing upright beneath the surface, her hair floating like black smoke, her eyes open at last, two hollow sockets filled with water. Her lips parted, and I heard her clearly, though she did not rise. "You took what wasn't yours to take." She raised a hand, and the water answered her gesture. It surged upward, clinging to the walls, the steps, to me. The cold pierced through my clothes, through my bones. I stumbled back toward the spiral stair, gasping as something brushed my leg. Fingers, soft and heavy, pulling gently, insistently. I tried to climb, but the staircase had changed. It didn't lead upward anymore. Every step now turned downward, spiraling deeper into a darkness that smelled like rain and graves. I realized then that maybe there was never a way back up. Maybe there never had been. From somewhere deep below, I heard the creak of a door opening, and a voice I recognized, My own, whispered. You can't leave what remembers you. The sound of the door echoed up the spiral like a heartbeat. Steady, patient, inevitable. Each creak made the walls shudder, and droplets of black water fell from the ceiling like rain that had forgotten how to stop. I didn't want to turn toward it, but I did. At the bottom of the staircase, the door stood wide now. Not swung open by force, not cracked in panic, simply open, as though it had been waiting for me all along. Beyond it was nothing. No floor, no sky, just a slow, endless churn of darkness that moved like a tide with nowhere left to go. The whispering had stopped. All that remained was the sound of water breathing. Then the locket in my hand began to vibrate again, soft but urgent. I looked down. The hinge had split. Inside, where the photograph had been, was now only a fragment of glass, thin as frost, cold as regret. My reflection stared up from it. But the reflection wasn't moving when I did. It tilted its head the other way, smiling faintly, the way I'd seen before. Then it spoke, its voice small and hollow, like someone speaking through water. There's no door for you, only a way back in. The glass cracked. The reflection blinked, and I felt it behind me before I saw it. She was standing on the stair above, dripping, gray, her hollow eyes fixed on the open door below. Her hand rested on my shoulder, cold and steady. And though her mouth didn't move, I heard her clearly. You built the room. You called the river. Images flooded my mind. Cases I'd buried, names I'd crossed off, reports I'd closed too soon. The drowned girl was the first, but not the only one. Each disappearance I'd ignored had weight now, pressing against me, filling the stairwell with the soft sound of unseen people climbing. The walls began to throb with movement. Hands, too many hands, pushed through the wet plaster, groping, searching. Their touch was heavy with recognition. I stumbled forward, toward the open door, toward the dark. Maybe it was instinct, maybe surrender. The air beyond the threshold wasn't cold or warm. It was nothing. Yet somehow, it smelled like rain, like the first time I saw her file spread across my desk. The woman whispered one last time, her voice almost tender. It started with you looking back. It ends when you stop. And she pushed me through the doorway. Falling didn't feel like falling. It felt like remembering. Every lie I'd told myself, every case I'd buried under paperwork and whiskey, every scream I'd turned away from, all of it drifted past me in the dark. Then, with a sound like breath breaking the surface, I hit the water. It wasn't cold anymore. It was thick, heavy warm. It clung to me, pulling me down instead of letting me rise. My flashlight flickered once, caught the glint of movement below, and then died for good. The current moved around me in slow circles. Shapes floated nearby, fragments of doors, pieces of wallpaper, the edges of my office torn apart and drifting like debris in a black tide. I realized, slowly, painfully, that this wasn't a river beneath the city. This was the city. Everything I'd known, every street, every case, it was all part of this endless flood. And it was alive. In the water before me, something rose. Her. The woman from the photograph. But now her face was clear, and I knew her. She had been my first client, years ago. The one I hadn't saved. The one I'd promised I would. She reached out a hand, and I couldn't help it. I took it. Her grip was firm, human, too human. You found me, she whispered. But you never left. I looked down. The reflection in the water wasn't hers anymore. It was mine. Pale, hollow-eyed, hair drifting in the current. Watching myself drown. Her voice came again, quieter now, fading like the echo of a secret too tired to hide anymore. Now we remember together. And as the last bubbles left my throat, the water around me stilled. The current stopped. The whispers ceased. For the first time in what felt like years, there was peace. But somewhere above, far above, I could still hear it. The faint creak of my office chair. The slow click of the tape recorder. And a voice, my voice, murmuring through the static. Don't look away. Then the water closed over everything.